Solomon Wood. I'm editor-in-chief of Canada's National Observer, and this is Conversations. I'm happy this morning to have Minister Catherine McKenna here with me. Good morning, Catherine. Good morning from Vancouver.
Good morning, Linda. It's afternoon now. We're already in afternoon here in Ottawa.
You're ahead of us. And I'm not so happy to have construction outside with us, but we'll make the best of it. And I apologize to our audience if you hear it at any time. Minister McKenna.
I'm the Minister of Infrastructure. Very happy to hear construction.
So Minister McKenna, thank you so much for being with us. We only have 30 minutes of your time, so let's jump right in. First question for you. Since President Biden's climate summit, have you been speaking with your U.S. counterpart, Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, about how you can collaborate?
So actually, I have a meeting with the Secretary Buttigieg next week to talk about infrastructure. We've been talking to folks on his team. Also, I mean, a lot of folks there are from the from the Obama administration. So Gina McCarthy, who's amazing, she was head of the Environmental Protection Agency. She's kind of their climate czar. Obviously, John Kerry's there, but. Look, I think there's a lot of reflections. They put out what they want in terms of really ambitious $3 trillion plan. But in Canada, I think we have to be louder and prouder. We're actually, if you adjust for our population and even for the dollar, we're actually on par. And that was pre-budget. We've invested around $250 billion in kind of broadly speaking, Build Back Better. And as I say, that was even before our budget. So lots of reflections, and we've learned a lot. Like in 5 years, I feel like I'm paying it back. They helped us out. They were there for a year. Then it was very tough times with the administration, the Trump administration. But a lot of reflections on where you should make big bets. How do you work on with racialized communities, with Indigenous communities? How do you have a long-term vision? We're doing a national infrastructure assessment. So lots of good conversations going on. And I think we can support each other because we're on the same page, I think, very aligned.
Minister, thank you so much for that. I wanted to let you know that we have about 200 people with us today listening in. And I'm just wondering, speaking, to them and to Canadians, what have you learned about Joe Biden's plan that you feel Canadians don't know and need to know?
Well, it's very ambitious. That Americans, they have a weird thing about infrastructure because he's having to now explain to Americans that infrastructure does include social infrastructure. It does include childcare. It also includes charging stations. These are all things I think Canadians would understand and expect. But look, I think the scale is huge. It's a $3 trillion plan that's very ambitious. Now, of course, there's going to be some wheeling and dealing in the U.S. It's not necessarily that easy. But I think I think what's really important is the alignment. And by alignment, I mean, you could talk about the categories, but let's talk about outcomes, because I care about outcomes. 3 things that they're very focused on: jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We're in a pandemic. We're in an economic crisis. We're in a jobs crisis. We need to talk to Canadians and Americans about things they care about. They care about jobs. 2, it's about everything has to be about reducing emissions and building resilience. So they've talked about a climate lens through all of their infrastructure investments. And that's what we are bringing in. I mean, we have it now, but I want to expand it across government for every investment. And the third thing is we talk about inclusivity, inequality. They talk about racial injustice, disadvantaged communities. And so those 3 areas I think are really important. We're very aligned on outcomes. And now, I mean, the devil is always in the detail. How do you make sure for each program, for all of your investments, you're getting triple benefits? Every taxpayer dollar has to get triple benefits. That's my view. It has to jobs and growth, climate action, resilience, and it has to build more inclusive communities for everyone.
One of the things that Bill Gates talks about in his book on climate, which you can agree or disagree with some of the things he says, but one of the things that left me with was that if we're really going to meet our target of surviving past 9 years from now, that we really need to transform all of society. It's not just about the oil industry or the building industry or transportation. None of these things in and of themselves can help us get there. What are your views on that?
I mean, it's just true. You look at what people often, they put so much pressure on the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, but this is a whole of government. Think about this. This is a whole system. It's got to be, climate change has to be the prism through which you see absolutely everything. And of course, by that, I mean, like you see the transportation sector, but you have to see climate change as a national security crisis. Then you will think differently about the role of the military. You will think about national security differently. You'll think about climate refugees. So it really requires an across the board approach, but it also requires linking files, right? Like when you're making investments in infrastructure, you could say, well, we got to do these things. But once again, a climate lens on everything you do will get you to a different place. It'll also look at opportunities that you might not think about. So low carbon concrete, for example, or low carbon aluminum and steel. Like we have these huge competitive advantages. The supply chain for rare earth minerals. All of these things, you have to look across the board. You have to work with different levels of government. You have to work with the private sector. You have to work with Indigenous peoples, with environmentalists. And then, of course, you have to listen to young people because they are just like, forget it. We don't want to hear any excuses. Just get going.
So let's talk a little bit about coordination. If that's the case, first of all, how involved were you in cabinet discussions around green spending leading up to the budget? And what would you have liked to have seen in terms of, that kind of overall coordination?
Well, there's definitely a few of us that are very focused. You've probably seen. I work very closely with my successor, Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, but also Stephen Guilbeault. Many of you folks here, I'm sure, know Stephen Guilbeault. He was the founder of Equité, a longtime environmentalist, and we did spend a lot of time having conversations, but we did it across. With other ministers as well. I think that the budget is a thing, but I think that you can't miss all the other investments we've been making. I mean, this has been an iterative process. We started with our first ever climate plan with a price on pollution, phasing out coal, doing things across the board. And then we ramped up ambition. That was before budget. We came up with our new climate plan with a new target in December. Then we rolled out historic public transit spending on a scale that is way bigger than the United States. We're already investing over $25 billion. We're putting $8 billion more. We're doing $3 billion permanent public transit ongoing. And then we announced our new target, and then we announced our budget. So there's a whole bunch of pieces. Look, I think the budget had to do three things. And I think it's really important. So I say this, like, it is important that we're not one-trick ponies, right? Like, climate is everything, but also we're in the middle of a pandemic and you cannot lose sight of that. We have to support Canadians through the pandemic. That is incredibly important. We have to conquer COVID, but of course our investments need to also, as we invest in infrastructure, we need to be investing in sustainable infrastructure. We need to be planning for the future. So I think there was a requirement to do both. And then there are things that are also just really important, which you may not directly relate to climate, but childcare. That is really, really important. I'm a mom. Like, I hear about this all the time. That's an inclusivity piece, that our essential workers are having to go to work. How are their kids going to school? I can barely manage it. So I think you got to do a bunch of things. But at the end of this, we're going to get through the pandemic and we'll still have the climate crisis. And
That's
so we have to stay focused. And we actually have to take the same ambition we took to getting a vaccine, to tackling COVID, to climate. People thought we would never get a vaccine. That's what I heard at the beginning of this. People thought we could never do it. And we listened to science and scientists, that we had an ambition, a goal, clear goal. We've got a clear goal, stay well below 2 degrees, strive for 1.5. That we showed, there was leadership shown, that you worked across, governments, but also with different groups, with the private sector, with health professionals. And so we got to do that. Like, that's what I hope coming out of COVID, that we're like, yeah, you know what? We can do this for climate, and let's just focus.
Thank you so much, Minister. Interesting what you're saying about focus on science, listening to the facts. As former Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and now as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, how do you balance addressing the climate crisis while not alienating provinces dependent on the fossil fuel industry? And, our readers are always wanting to know, how can the Liberal government say it's focused on climate change and also invest in the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Can you speak to both of those?
Look, I mean, I think that, you have to be absolutely ambitious, but we live in a federation. Like, actually, that's a real thing. Having said that, I will say, I hope everyone that's watching cheered the decision of the Supreme Court, because that was actually really important. Getting a decision like that actually said, guess what? Climate change doesn't know, pollution doesn't know any borders. And this is something that the federal government needs to act on, I think is a very important decision. But you do need to work with provinces and territories. And you also, one thing I really did learn, maybe a bit the hard way, because, I took some knocks and then I thought, okay, you're gonna have to do a better
That's
job.
an understatement.
I took a few knocks. Yeah, I did take a lot of knocks. Some of it was unfair. I will say that, and I will always fight that. But some of it, you got to reflect in my business, and you have to say, okay, there are real people here. And why are some people reacting this way? Yes, they are hearing misinformation and disinformation, but we phased out coal. Like, phasing out coal means you're phasing out jobs. You're literally phasing out jobs, and communities that are dependent on coal. That's the one thing in town. And so I worked with Hassan Youssef. We had I think one of the world's first just transition task force to go listen to folks. And we have to do this more, just fighting. I know it's hard, but it is important to listen to folks who have different views. You don't always have to agree, but people in these communities, guess what? 600 people would pack into the town hall, and they were mad, and they were scared, and they worried about the future, and they worried about the future of their kids. It's not that they didn't care about the environment, but gosh, they wanted to put food on the table, and they're thinking, how is this going to impact us? And so I think that is a reflection. I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with TMX. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but you can get lost in one project. We need to transition, and we have to do everything across the board. And I know there's some people I will never convince about that, but we need to continue to move forward in an ambitious way. It's all on hands on deck, and that includes fossil fuels. Like, we got to move forward. You've seen what the US is doing. There's an ambition, but the good news is I actually think that the part of it is the market. There's a lot of focus on governments, and yes, rightly so, we have to regulate and do things, but the market has to move. The money has to move. And Mark Carney he's actually a very good friend, but he's also a huge ally on this, because he is helping to move the market. He's getting people to recognize that you're going to have stranded assets, that you need to be investing in the cleaner future, that to not do that is a massive risk to your business. And I think that is absolutely incredibly important. But you know what I worry about? I worry most about people. How do I bring the most Canadians on board? The haters, whatever, are going to hate, but regular Canadians, I'm from Hamilton, right? Like, you have to talk to real people, like people talk, and you have to have empathy, and then you have to have ambition, and then you have to show leadership. Sometimes you have to do things and people aren't going to like it. Putting a price on pollution, that was extremely hard last election. It was a massive fight, but guess what? Canadians, they stepped up, and guess what? Now we've increased the price. So good news, that's one measure, but you got to do measures across the board, and we're going to keep on doing it, pushing. And in good news, we can support each other. Like, we can support the US on some things. They can push us to be more ambitious. And that's how you're going to do this. Really important. And show jobs and growth. That's the story.
Thanks so much. Getting back to Joe Biden's plan in Canada, I'd like to talk a little bit about carbon capture. A 2021 report from the International Institute for Sustainable Development found Canadian fossil fuel subsidies were $1.9 billion in 2020. Carbon capture, is carbon capture the Liberal government's way of counteracting that? Or tell us how those two things go together. And how is Joe Biden looking at carbon capture and fossil fuel subsidies?
I think we do need to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. I think that's really important. We have to have the right incentives. There are some cases that you're going to have exceptions, like, the remote communities that are on diesel. We have fossil fuel subsidies there. We help them because diesel is really expensive. So I think, you need to be smart about things. Look, I think that there are different technological solutions. Carbon capture is a solution, and there's different ways to do carbon capture. And carbon capture is not just for, what you think about traditional oil and gas. I think there's industry as well, broader industry. I mean, I think we just need to be careful. Like, we know what the existing solutions are. I think there are new solutions, but there's no magic wand on this. You don't get a get out of jail free card because you come up with, one idea. I think that, you need to take a hard look at things, that we need to figure out this transition across sectors, and everyone has to do their part. And there are higher emissions coming from certain sectors, and that's just a reality. But I mean, I think actually the ISD report, because I love ISD, I work closely with those folks. I mean, the other thing we need to think about is what else, nature. We don't talk enough about nature and sinks and the role that they play in our boreal forests. And I will say that's one of, I think, a really great story with Indigenous peoples in Canada. We would not be able to be committing to protect 25% of our nature by 2025 if we were not doing it in partnership with Indigenous peoples. That's incredibly important. And I think it's an important model for the world. And I think that's how you can have other folks be part of the solution. I think farmers are an important part of the solution too. We don't always have them on side. Sometimes they think that we're not supportive of farmers. I think we need to get folks into the space that we can all contribute. But there, as I say, no magic bullets in things. And I don't think, sometimes people just want to say technology is going to save the world. Absolutely. Clean tech is something, but regulations, really important to drive this. Price on pollution, incredibly important to do this. And then everyone's got to do their part.
Let's talk a little bit about hydrogen. What is Canada's commitment to hydrogen? And again, can you compare it to the US? Can you compare it to Joe Biden's plans?
There's a lot of attention on hydrogen. I think there's different types of hydrogen. You can get into blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. I mean, look, these are all opportunities for Canada. I know that President Biden is certainly ambitious in this space, but I mean, Europe, talk to Germany. Germany is super, super ambitious. We signed an agreement to work with them. But hydrogen I think it has to be part of the solution. There's this great video out there. Someone can find it. It's like, it's climate scientist. So he's got this little town. He's like, how do we get this town completely 100% clean energy? And he goes through all the things you would do. And he's like, okay, in the very end, we're going to have to do hydrogen. And it's good because it's very confusing. I mean, I think everyone's trying to figure out how do all these different pieces play. And in the end, it's just molecules. You have to deal with the molecules and you got to figure that out. You just got to reduce them. So I think hydrogen has a huge role. I know that there's been a real focus on that. I think that we made very significant investments in the budget. But there are different, I saw someone saying there are different types of hydrogen. I agree with that. I'm not a super expert on this, but I think that there's a role for hydrogen. Green is definitely good.
Okay.
I like this. I can see all these comments coming in. It's just okay, what else are they saying? All these smart people.
They're pouring in, and we now have, I don't know, close to 300 people on the call. So I just wanted to.
Hey, hi, everyone.
There's questions coming in all over Canada.
Please get vaccinated.
Deborah, who wanted to know, and she's in the chat, I'd love to hear from Minister McKenna on where Canada and the US are best positioned to cooperate on climate initiatives.
That's a really good question because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. As soon as the Biden administration was elected, I was like, okay, rewriting. We had an agreement with the Obama administration in 2016. And in some ways it's updating a lot of that. There's obvious places. The auto sector, I'm from Hamilton, as I said, I mean, huge opportunity. We have to electrify, and that's not just cars, that's trucks. That's the whole transportation sector. So I think that's certainly a huge opportunity. Clean energy. I can't remember if I said this. I like bragging a bit about Canada. I mean, we're 80% clean electricity. The US is 40%. They said they're going to 100% by 2035. They need our help. So I think that's a real opportunity to work with the United States. We're lucky to have a number of provinces who are already actually exporting some of the power. We need to figure that out here too, because we still have 4 provinces that are on coal. I think I think we need to look at clean, the transportation sector. So that's ports, airports. Those are like the tough solutions. Supply chain. Rare earth minerals. I think that's also a good geopolitical play. If you want me, that's a broader conversation. And then I think we need to learn from each other. As I say, I mean, I think some of the lessons that we have learned about partnering with Indigenous peoples, I think that there's a lot of ambition to do that. It's hard. I'll be quite frank. I had a huge learning curve. I'm still learning, but we've been able to do some pretty amazing things with First Nations communities, also with Inuit and with Métis Nations. So I think there's a huge amount of learnings we can do. Methane, we need to do methane, we need to do vehicle emission standards. I can go on if you want to go. I
have some other questions for you. This is a question from Jenny Laforestier. It's regarding some reporting we've been doing on the Ford government's dismantling of Ontario's conservation legislation. Natural heritage systems like the Oak Ridges Moraine and the Greenbelt are under threat from massive infrastructure projects. We already know that the government has gotten involved, the federal government, this week, but will the government impose a federal environmental impact assessment in a broader way?
So I should be clear, I did help design, it was infamously called Bill C-69, but the Impact Assessment Act. So it is an independent process, but it is really important to know that this week we said for the the expansion of the 413, which I think lots of us know about if you're in Ontario, it has some pretty significant challenges. It is being reviewed. So that was I think a well-received decision and extremely important. We need to really understand the impacts of these major projects. Look, I would like the province to step up. Like we're all like, I just think we all have to remember what is important. Mark Carney's book, I'll do a pitch for that, Value and Values. What are we valuing? Like once you destroy things, it's gone. It's gone. There is no way you can pretend you can bring things back, but it's extraordinarily hard to do. So that is something I think very hard about. I don't think there's different ways you can be engaged, and a shout out because we have also great environmentalists, great community organizations that really step up. And they are, they're the ones who are saying like, look, guys, and at the end, it's about people, right? Like I always think about that, like people stepping up is really important, saying, you know what, I care about these species at risk. I care about the green belt. I care about nature. I care about clean water. I care about clean air. So look, I mean, I have conversations with the Ford government, obviously, and just emphasizing the importance of, honestly, it's better to work together on these things, but sometimes it is important for the federal government to step up.
Thanks. And I just want to give a shout out to Emma McIntosh, our reporter, who did phenomenal work on this story.
He really did.
With the Toronto Star. That was a great collaboration, and to journalists who dig into these stories and bring them to the attention of the government in a way that it might not have that attention otherwise. And we only have time for one more question, Minister, and then I'd like to just give you a chance to conclude in the way that you want to, and whatever you have to tell us in your last 2 minutes. But George Carpot asks, Canada's GHGs have increased 21% since 1990. How are you going to meet minus 37% in 9 years?
Well, I mean, we're just going to have to do the hard work. And I know, look, people have said, wait, you're still going up a little. The way it works, right? Like when you look at policies, they don't come in the next day. And I know that's annoying, but that's just the reality. We had a Harper government for 10 years, went in the wrong direction. So it was very hard. And guess what? If you lose elections, which I was worried, like I was very worried about price and pollution, it kept me up every single night of the election. I was worried because if you get different governments, you get different outcomes. We see that elections matter. But we now have a plan, like actually one of the most rigorous plans in the world, where we actually like every single measure we do. It's not just, don't just throw a target on the wall. You got to show how you get there. The only way you get there, honestly, is the hard work. And we've been working, we work with environmentalists, we work with industry, we work with all the players to really understand, okay, where are we getting our emissions? But there's no free pass. And this is why we need net zero legislation. It's why we need to be accountable every year to see where our emissions are. If we're not on track, we need to get back on track. And every government needs to be bound to targets. You have to be. That is the only way you actually protect, in a way, governments. Now, of course, some new government could get rid of the legislation. But in the end, it's Canadians. Canadians will hold us accountable, and Canadians are on it. They're on climate now in a way When I started as Minister of Environment and Climate Change, like 2015, as a new minister, I was like petrified. They cared, but they're much more sophisticated, and they really, really care, and they expect governments to act.
So, Minister, what is it that you think that when you go around Canada and you're talking to Canadians a lot, what can you say to us about, as citizens, what we can do to do our part to speed things along in Canada in solving the climate crisis and meeting net zero targets?
I mean, of course, everyone needs to do their part, and that's really important. I'm reading Michael Mann's book, so I'd really encourage folks to read that, because he said, look, it's really important that we all do our part, but it's the really big things. The really big things actually really matter, and you have to land them, and you have to have support. So I think just, supporting parties, whatever parties that you believe are actually, taking action and serious action, and that have modeled it and are going to do it. And I just think, look, in life, you can do, I guess I'm just someone who's ambitious about doing things. You can do the little things, and they're still going to be hard in this space. And climate is not easy. Or you can do the really big things, and it's still going to be hard, but that's the only way you tackle climate change. And so let's just do the big things and keep on pushing. And to the young people, thank you, because it really helped. I know some people are like, wait, they're slamming you. I was like, that is A-okay, because we need them to be pushing way harder and to be convincing their grandparents to support this action, or else we're never going to get there. Because in the end, it can't be a fight, because if it's a fight, you know what? You can lose. You can get a new government in that just does not want to do anything. And that's not how we're not going to move forward unless we do it together. And literally, this is the only thing I care about. The thing is the thing, and the thing is climate change. And we need to get there, but we need to kind of figure out how we do it together. We have to. And I really think that is hard. But I'm committed to doing everything. Now I got this new portfolio where you invest, and every dollar, as I say, has to do triple duty. It has to create jobs and growth. It has to tackle climate change and build resilience. And it has to tackle racial inequality and inequality with respect to Indigenous peoples. We have a huge infrastructure gap with Indigenous peoples. I just announced Infrastructure Bank is going to have to invest $1 billion in partnership with Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples through my program. I have an allocation specifically distinctions-based, Métis, First Nation, Inuit, separate. We have to do that. And then, we'll be able to tackle climate change, but also, we're lucky. We live in an amazing country, and we will be able to enjoy things that matter. Getting back to values.
In our last 2 minutes, Minister, what will you do to make sure that this infrastructure fund, as well as the new ones announced in the latest budget, actually get put to use in an accountable way and quickly?
I'm always about quick, but I'm also about accountable. And as I say, I'm a mom, got to make sure every dollar counts. The climate lens, incredibly important. I think that's been a bit of a learning curve for folks. I think that they're like, whoa, here's McKenna, she is changing this. But also how we support, we are doing a lot now directly with communities. I think that is also a lesson maybe I learned. Sometimes communities, or you talked about it, cities can be more ambitious maybe than the provincial levels. So we need to be rewarding that. And you just need to do the math. You got to reduce the emissions. And we're doing a national infrastructure assessment. So this can sound really nerdy, but I'm kind of a policy nerd at the same time. We need to figure out or map out to net zero. That requires diligence. That requires everyone deciding what is really important. We put out what I think, we think as a government is really important, but is that the infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure we want to be investing in? Second question is, how do we get everyone together? Yes, that's levels of government, but there's a bunch of other people involved in the infrastructure space. And then the last thing is, how are we going to pay, how are we going to fund or finance it? Because there's huge costs associated with the transition to net zero. So we need people to buy into that so that we're making the investments in our future. So tune in, you can get engaged. Also come up with your projects. We've announced new national infrastructure, new active transportation fund, a healthy communities fund, electric bus funds. Get your communities applying for these programs, because we're all going to do this together. So Let's do it, man.
Thanks so much, Minister McKenna. Great having you back with us. Next up, I'll be speaking with the Director and Deputy Director of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative on May 13th. Seth Klein will join us on May 20th to discuss his latest book. And on June 10th, author Alexandra Samuels will be speaking about working from home and the impact on our carbon footprint. Great to have you with us again. Thank you to everybody on the call today, all 260 of you. See you next time.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye.